turned a blind eye because they felt as if that is the way that you build champions. No, that is the way you break a human being.
This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. This week marks the opening ceremony for the 2020 Olympics, which became the 2021 Olympics for obvious reasons. This global event that everyone around the world comes together to watch is full of excitement and pride and incredible athletic achievement. I mean, how can you not watch Simone Biles nail a triple-double and just feel a little red, white, and blue thrill? But if you pull back from the games and the athletes and look at the Olympics as an institution, there's still quite a bit of room for improvement. So tonight we're talking about what can be done to make the Olympics even better for athletes, organizers, and the local residents of the cities that host the games, starting with this. Holding an event on the Olympic scale comes at a price. Last year, organizers said the games would cost $15 billion. But now government audits say spending could be billions more. Some of the biggest costs come from infrastructure, security, and insurance. The games also tend to always go way over budget. Between 1960 and 2016, the average games cost 156% more than expected. That's more than double. For the cities that host the Olympics, this can be a big burden for them to take on. The COVID-19 pandemic has only further exposed the financial risk of hosting. But that's not the only risk. Over the years, fewer and fewer cities have even been vying for a hosting opportunity. For the 2004 Olympics, there were 11 bids. For 2024, there were only 2. It also costs millions of dollars to enter your bid. If your bid wins, congrats. But over time, it's gotten financially tougher for hosts, and the International Olympics Committee has taken a bigger slice of the overall profits from the games.
So social disruption, environmental disruption, economic loss, why do it? And I think the answer is you shouldn't do it.
Andrew Zimbalist is a professor at Smith College who has written several books about the economic impact of the Olympics. He's pointed out that when organizers decide where they want to build Olympic facilities, if there are people living on that land, they kick them out. Not only are people being displaced after the games, the city is paying to maintain these venues that are oftentimes unused or abandoned. Instead, many critics say this money could go towards creating affordable housing or other necessities for local residents.
So if you don't have an economically viable use for a facility before the games, which is why it wasn't built, why would you have an economically viable use for a facility, the same facility, 17 days later after the games are over?
So how can we make the games more feasible and affordable for host cities? And, kinder to their residents? The city of Los Angeles, who's hosted the games before and will host again in 2028, could offer a potential solution.
In essence, they've got just about everything they need. And so the kind of investments that have been required elsewhere are not required in LA. And hence, I think that it would be a reasonable city to think about as a permanent host.
Or maybe, just maybe, we can go back to where it all started. Basically, some permanent space on the Olympics' original home turf.
Another possibility would be to find some acreage of land. You need several hundred acres of land somewhere between Olympia and Athens and Greece, and build the whole infrastructure right there.
So we've talked a bit about how the Olympics impact local residents in host cities. And as it turns out, folks in Japan are not thrilled about the games going forward in the middle of a pandemic. In a phone survey conducted this month, nearly 70% of respondents said they don't think the games will be safe and secure. 55% of respondents said they are opposed to the games going forward. Despite the sentiments, the games are still a go. We asked Tokyo residents about how they plan to take in the festivities while the city is under its 4th COVID state of emergency.
It's an Olympics like no other. Delayed because of the pandemic, the Summer Games will finally open this week. But the cloud of COVID-19 continues to loom large over Tokyo.
There are a lot of people feeling anxious about holding the Olympics itself under this situation.
Tokyo is under a state of emergency due to rising COVID cases and a still limited vaccine supply. This year's Olympics will take place without any spectators, a decision that drew mixed feelings from locals.
I think having no spectators is such a shame.
残念ですけど
I think this is unfortunate, but if they had spectators, the number of COVID cases might have increased.
Tokyo entered a state of emergency less than 2 weeks before the opening ceremony, amid concerns over the spread of the Delta variant. The more infectious strain of COVID-19 now accounts for nearly a third of cases in Tokyo. It's the fourth time the host city has taken such action since the pandemic began.
重要視
The state of emergency has been issued so frequently that it has made us a bit numb to the situation.
The restrictions announced include an alcohol ban in bars and restaurants, which are also being asked to close early. With the state of emergency expected to last throughout the Olympics, Tokyo residents are being asked to watch the games on TV from home.
もちろんテレビ観戦で
Of course, I will watch the games on TV.
Shira Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
The attitude surrounding the Olympics is different this year, and as more athletes arrive in Tokyo, it's not exactly calming any concerns. A Chilean taekwondo athlete and a Dutch skateboarder both tested positive for COVID on Wednesday and will now miss the Olympics. Newsy's Megumi Lim has more from Tokyo. How is everyone feeling with the COVID protocols now that some athletes have tested positive?
People in Japan are worried about the Olympic Games moving forward and whether or not COVID protocols currently in place are enough to keep them safe. Right now, Japan's borders are closed to international travelers, except for people who are accredited to participate in the Games. And these people who are flying in from abroad are meant to stay in what is called the Olympic bubble for the first 14 days after their arrival, where their movements and activities are limited to their hotels, specific Olympic venues, and the press center. But after these 14 days and after testing negative for COVID, people are able to leave this bubble and go out into the public. But there is a flaw in this system because people who have come out of the bubble are still able to visit the same venues and press centers and interact with people who are still in the bubble, which means that there is always a risk of the virus spreading within the bubble and out into the public. And this has been a cause for concern for people in Japan.
Okay, so quick story. The 96 Olympics are near and dear to me. My aunt was living in Atlanta at the time, and she got us a towel or something that was in the family for way too long. Anyway, the most significant part of the games for me was gymnast Dominique Dawes and her history-making performance. She became the first Black woman to win an Olympic gold in gymnastics. Now, Dawes is running a gym not far from here in Maryland with the hopes of making gymnastics healthier and safer for athletes. Newsy's Amber Strong has more.
I distanced myself a great deal from the sport because I thought it was the sport that was so unhealthy, and then I realized it's not the sport that's unhealthy, it's the people that are in the sport.
Decades after hanging up her leotard, 3-time Olympic gymnast and 4-time gold medalist Dominique Dawes is back in the gym.
Maybe introduce her to your new friends. That sound good?
But not in the way you may think. This time, her name is on the building, an accomplishment she says comes with great responsibility.
During the interview process, my whole thing is, why do you want to be a part of this facility? And if it's first and foremost not about the kids and having a passion to work with kids, they're not on board.
Dawes opened this facility in the aftermath of the abuse revelations and subsequent cover-ups of convicted sex offender Larry Nassar, a man Dawes says was her doctor for nearly a decade as a young athlete. She says the culture at the time provided coverage for Nassar.
There were a lot of adults present watching these young kids get verbally, physically, mentally, psychologically abused, and they turned a blind eye because they felt as if that is the way that you build champions. No, that is the way you break a human being.
Far removed from her days as part of the Magnificent Seven, Dawes' goal now is to give her kids and kids from her home state of Maryland a soft place to land, physically and emotionally.
She says the industry needed an overhaul, and the best place to start is where it all begins, in the gym. Right now, focusing on recreational gymnastics and ninja training, with hopes for moving to a competitive team in the future.
I train 36 plus hours a week in the gymnastics gym. That is pretty common if you're training at the elite level. That's not going to happen here.
In recent years, Olympians are bucking a world where athletes were often told to power through their emotions and are opening up more and more about mental health.
There was one point I didn't want to be alive.
In some cases, setting their own boundaries.
Naomi Osaka withdrew from the French Open to focus on her mental health.
Dawes says she applauds their courage, is doing her part here at the gym, and encouraging parents to look for signs of trauma.
You're sitting there in the waiting room and you're watching your child cry. They're crying many times walking in the gym. They're stoic, they're not smiling, they're not enjoying their childhood. They leave crying, they leave in fear, and you bring them back in fear. That's a problem. It's not worth it. It's not worth the long-term ill effects that it's going to leave on your young daughter or your young son. Take them out, find a healthier gym, find a healthier environment.
Amber Strong, Newsy, Clarksburg, Maryland.
What do you get when you cross a tiny mammal and a board game? One of the most visible aspects of the upcoming Olympics.